It was May 14th, 2008. At 1:54 a.m., a panicked phone call reached the Swanson home. "Dad, help! I went in the ditch." Those were the words. 19-year-old Brandon Swanson spoke from somewhere in the vast Minnesota countryside. For the next 47 minutes, his father tried desperately to locate him in the darkness. Then came the words, "Oh shit," followed by silence. Brandon Swanson vanished without a trace that night, leaving behind only questions that remain unanswered to this day. Brandon had been celebrating the end of his spring semester at Minnesota West Community and Technical College with friends in Canby. Driving home alone to marshal along the rural back roads, something went wrong. He believed he was near Lynn, and his Chevrolet Lumina somehow ended up in a ditch. When Brian Swanson, Brandon's father, drove out to find his son, confusion only deepened. Brandon flashed his headlights, but his father saw nothing. They were somehow searching in completely different locations, separated by miles of dark Minnesota farmland. The final call lasted 47 minutes as Brandon described walking toward what he believed were the lights of Lind. Cell phone tower data later revealed he was actually near Porter, Minnesota, approximately 25 miles from where he thought he was. What caused him to suddenly exclaim, "Oh shit," before the line went dead has haunted investigators and his family for years. When dawn broke, searchers found Brandon's abandoned car near a field approach off County Road 15, but no sign of Brandon himself. Extensive searches covering thousands of acres over many months yielded nothing. No clothing, no personal effects, no Brandon. In the spring of 2008, Brandon Swanson was living the typical life of a 19-year-old finding his way in the world. With a lean build, short brown hair, and an easy smile, Brandon was known among friends and family for his easygoing nature and passion for the outdoors. Brandon had just completed his first year at Minnesota West Community and Technical College in Canby, a small town of barely 1,700 residents nestled in the farmlands of Yellow Medicine County. He was studying wind energy technology, a forward-thinking choice for a young man from rural Minnesota. His instructors described him as dedicated and thoughtful, with a mechanical aptitude that served him well in his chosen field. Brandon was always tinkering with something, recalls one of his instructors. He had this natural curiosity about how things worked. When other students might give up on a problem, Brandon would stay late, working until he figured it out. His parents, Brian and Annette Swanson, had always maintained a close relationship with their son. Living in Marshall, Minnesota, about 30 miles from Canby, they spoke with Brandon several times a week. Unlike many teenagers who drift from their parents during these transitional years, Brandon remained connected to his family. "We were always close," Annette Swanson would later tell reporters, her voice catching as she spoke about her son in the past tense. "He would call just to chat about his day or ask for advice. That's why it wasn't unusual when he called that night. He trusted us to help when he needed it." Brian Swanson, Brandon's father, shared similar sentiments about their relationship. "Brandon and I could talk about anything. We went fishing together whenever we could. He was becoming a man, but he wasn't too proud to still be our son." May 13th, 2008 began as an ordinary Tuesday for Brandon. He attended his final classes of the semester at Minnesota West. According to classmates, he was in good spirits, looking forward to summer break and discussing plans to return in the fall. As classes ended that afternoon, Brandon made plans to celebrate with friends. The end of spring semester marked a milestone worth commemorating. Several classmates gathered at a friend's home in Canby, a small, informal get-together to mark the occasion. One of Brandon's friends at the gathering later recounted, "It was nothing wild, just a few of us hanging out, listening to music, talking about summer plans. Brandon had a couple of beers, but nobody was out of control. It was just a normal night." Witnesses at the gathering consistently described Brandon as being in a positive mood. He mentioned looking forward to summer employment opportunities and spending time outdoors during the warmer months. There were no signs of distress, no unusual behavior, no conflicts with anyone present. Brandon stayed at the gathering until approximately 10:30 p.m., when he decided it was time to make the 30-mile drive back to his parents' home in Marshall. This drive along the rural highways was familiar to him. He had made the trip between Canby and Marshall countless times during his first year of college. I remember him saying goodbye. Nothing dramatic, recalled Karsten. He just said he was heading home and would catch up with everyone later. That was it. The last time any of us saw him. Some of Brandon's friends at the party added. He seemed completely normal when he left. We made plans to meet up later that week. There was nothing in his behavior that would make you think anything was wrong. Receipts and witness accounts confirm Brandon stopped for gas at a station in Canby at approximately 10:45 p.m. before beginning his drive home. Security footage shows him paying for fuel and purchasing a bottle of water. The clerk who served him reported nothing unusual about the interaction. By all accounts, Brandon Swanson was simply a young man ending a night of mild celebration, making his way home along familiar roads. The spring night was clear but dark in the rural countryside, with temperatures in the mid-50s. Cool, but not dangerously cold. What should have been a routine 40-minute drive turned into something else entirely. Sometime after midnight, Brandon's 1994 Chevrolet Lumina veered off the road and became stuck in a ditch. The exact time and circumstances of this event remain unclear, as no witnesses observed the incident. At 1:54 a.m. on May 14th, Brandon placed the call that would be the beginning of his mysterious disappearance. His first words to his father Brian were straightforward. "Dad, help. I went in the ditch." These final normal moments of Brandon Swanson's known life, a college student calling his father for help after a minor car mishap, give no indication of the perplexing mystery that was about to unfold. A mystery that continues to haunt his family, law enforcement, and the community of southwestern Minnesota to this day. Little did anyone know that this routine call home would mark the beginning of one of Minnesota's most baffling missing persons cases, and that Brandon Swanson would never be seen or heard from again. As the digital clock in Brandon Swanson's 1994 Chevrolet Lumina approached midnight on May 13th, he was navigating the darkened rural highways of southwestern Minnesota. The roads between Canby and Marshall were familiar to him, but at night, the landscape transformed into an indistinguishable tapestry of fields and distant farmhouse lights. The exact route Brandon took that night remains a subject of intense scrutiny. Investigators believe he may have chosen to take back roads rather than the more direct Highway 68. This decision, seemingly insignificant at the time, would later complicate search efforts immensely. What we know with certainty is that Brandon's journey home did not go as planned. At some point, his vehicle left the roadway and became stuck. There were no signs of collision, no evidence of another vehicle involved, just a car that had veered off course and could not be driven out. At 1:54 a.m. on May 14th, Brandon placed a call to his home in Marshall. His father, Brian Swanson, answered the phone to hear his son's voice on the other end. "Dad, help! I went in the ditch," Brandon said. According to Brian Swanson's later accounts, Brandon sounded frustrated, but not panicked. This wasn't an emergency call. It was a son asking his father for assistance with what seemed like a minor inconvenience. Brandon believed he knew exactly where he was, near the small town of Lind, southwest of Marshall. He was totally calm, Brian would later recall. He told me he was just outside of Lind and needed a ride. It seemed straightforward. Go pick up my son who'd had a minor accident. I had no reason to think anything more of it. Brian and Annette Swanson immediately got into their vehicle to rescue their son. They drove to the outskirts of Lind, precisely where Brandon had indicated he would be. But upon arriving at the location, they found no sign of Brandon or his car. "We were driving around Lind, and I told Brandon to flash his lights so we could see where he was," Brian explained. "He said he was flashing them, but we couldn't see anything." That's when the first hint of confusion set in. What followed was a series of increasingly perplexing exchanges. Brandon insisted he could see the lights of Lind. Brian insisted they were in Lind and could see no sign of Brandon's vehicle. Both father and son were becoming frustrated, each believing the other was somehow mistaken. "I know where I am," Brandon reportedly told his father. "I can see the lights of Lind right in front of me." The phone call continued as Brian and Annette circled the area, with Brandon providing what he believed were helpful landmarks. But nothing matched up. Every description Brandon gave seemed to lead nowhere. During this time, Brandon made a decision that would further complicate the situation. Rather than staying with his vehicle, as safety experts universally recommend, he began walking toward what he believed were the lights of Lind. He told his father he was following a fence line, crossing fields, moving confidently toward town. He said he was going to walk into Lind and meet us at the bar there, even though it was closed, Brian recounted. He sounded so sure of where he was. The call continued for 47 minutes in total, a conversation filled with confusion, periodic frustration, but no apparent fear. Or Brandon described crossing a stream or small river, likely the Yellow Medicine River, though he didn't identify it as such. He mentioned barbed wire fences, fields, and other rural landmarks that could have been almost anywhere in the agricultural landscape. Cell phone records would later reveal a shocking truth. Brandon wasn't anywhere near Lind. Tower data placed his phone near the town of Porter, approximately 25 miles north of where he thought he was. This massive discrepancy in location remains one of the case's most perplexing aspects. Law enforcement investigators who later worked the case explained, "It's hard to understand how someone could be so disoriented about their location, especially on roads they knew well. We've considered every possibility from intoxication to medical episodes to deliberate deception, but none fully explains the level of geographic confusion." According to toxicology estimates based on witness accounts of his alcohol consumption at the gathering, Brandon would likely have had a low blood alcohol content by the time of the incident, possibly under the legal limit, though this cannot be confirmed without medical evidence. At approximately 2:41 a.m., as the call approached the 47-minute mark, something changed dramatically. Brandon, who had been calmly conversing with his father throughout this lengthy call, suddenly exclaimed, "Oh shit!" Then the line went dead. Brian immediately called back. The call went straight to voicemail. He called again and again with the same result. Something had happened. But what? "That oh shit haunts me every day," Brian later told reporters, his voice breaking. Was it surprise? Fear? Did he fall? Was someone there? It wasn't like he was screaming in terror, but something clearly happened. And then, nothing. The family's concern escalated rapidly. What had been a frustrating situation now took on a more ominous tone. Brian and Annette continued searching the Lind area for hours before returning home to wait, hoping Brandon would simply walk through the door. By morning, with no sign of their son, the Swansons contacted law enforcement. The initial response was measured. After all, Brandon was an adult who had only been out of contact for a few hours. But as the day progressed with no word from Brandon, a more formal search began. Later that day, searchers located Brandon's Chevrolet Lumina. It wasn't near Lind at all, but rather off County Road 15 near Porter, consistent with the cell phone tower data. The car was simply off the road, not severely damaged, with the keys missing. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, nothing to indicate foul play. The car simply sat there, abandoned in the rural landscape. Technical analysis of the cell phone call provided additional insights. The final "oh shit" and call termination occurred when Brandon was likely near the Yellow Medicine River, based on tower triangulation and his own descriptions of his surroundings. This river, though not especially large, features steep banks in places and was running high due to spring rain. Cell phone engineers who analyzed the data explained, "The signal terminated suddenly, not gradually as you might expect if the battery died. This suggests either the phone was damaged, switched off, or entered an area with no coverage whatsoever." Investigators have proposed several theories about what might have happened in that final moment. 1. Brandon may have fallen into the Yellow Medicine River, explaining both the exclamation and the immediate phone disconnection. 2. He might have encountered a person or animal that startled him. 3. He could have suddenly realized his extreme disorientation, causing momentary panic. 4. He may have fallen into an abandoned well or other rural hazard not visible at night. The sheriff who led the initial investigation summarized the challenge. "We have the beginning of the story, Brandon driving home. We have the middle, his call to his parents. But we don't have the end. That final moment, whatever happened after oh shit, remains the missing piece that we've never been able to recover. What makes the case particularly unusual is the extended duration of contact immediately preceding the disappearance. Few missing persons cases feature such lengthy documentation of the person's final moments. The 47-minute call provides exceptional detail, yet somehow makes the mystery deeper rather than resolving it. The night of May 13th to 14th, 2008, began with a celebration of academic achievement and ended with a baffling disappearance that would launch years of searching, legislative change, and unanswered questions. Somewhere in the darkness between Porter and Lind, Minnesota, Brandon Swanson vanished without a trace, leaving behind only the echo of his final words. As first light broke over the Minnesota countryside on May 14th, no one yet realized that one of the state's most enduring mysteries had just begun. The Swanson family had endured a sleepless night, their calls to Brandon's phone going unanswered, their growing fear deepening with each passing hour. By 7 a.m., Brian and Annette Swanson formally reported their son missing to the Lyon County Sheriff's Department. The responding officers took detailed statements about the strange series of events from the previous night: the 1:54 a.m. call, the 47-minute conversation, the confusion over Brandon's location, and the final disturbing "oh shit" before the call abruptly ended. In the words of the deputies assigned to the case, "Initially, we approached it as we would any case involving a young adult who hasn't been home overnight," Landers later explained. "We've handled many situations where someone stays with a friend or has car trouble. But as the Swansons described the phone call and Brandon's disorientation, we quickly realized this wasn't a typical missing persons report." What caught our attention immediately was the discrepancy in location, the officers explained. Someone thinking they're near Lind when they're actually near Porter, that's not a minor navigational error. That's approximately 25 miles of difference. Something unusual had happened to this young man. The first priority was locating Brandon's vehicle. Officers from Lyon County coordinated with neighboring Yellow Medicine County, dividing the vast rural territory between them. Given the cell phone tower data pointing to the Porter area, search teams focused their initial efforts there rather than near Lind, where Brandon believed himself to be. At approximately 12:30 p.m. on May 14th, a Yellow Medicine County deputy located Brandon's 1994 Chevrolet Lumina. The vehicle sat abandoned off County Road 15, not far from Porter. The car was approximately 2 miles north of the Yellow Medicine River, in an area of sparse population and vast agricultural fields. The vehicle itself offered few clues. The Lumina was simply off the road, not severely damaged, with no signs of collision. The keys were missing, presumed to be with Brandon. There was no blood or signs of struggle inside the vehicle or in its immediate vicinity. Brandon's wallet was not in the car, suggesting he had it with him when he left the vehicle. The gas tank was nearly empty, which may explain why Brandon had pulled over, though this remains speculative. The sheriff assessed the scene personally. The car appeared to have been driven off the road rather than forced off by collision, he noted. It wasn't deeply stuck. A tow truck removed it easily. In daylight, most drivers would have been able to get this vehicle back on the road with minimal effort. The discovery of the vehicle transformed the search parameters. A formal search and rescue operation was launched immediately, focusing on a radius around the abandoned car and extending toward the Yellow Medicine River, based on Brandon's phone call description of crossing water. By 2 p.m. on May 14th, less than 12 hours after Brandon's final communication, the operation had grown substantially. Deputies from both Lyon and Yellow Medicine counties, volunteer firefighters from several towns, and emergency management personnel established a command post near where the car was found. Minnesota State Patrol helicopters were dispatched to provide aerial surveillance of the area. The helicopters utilized infrared technology to detect any heat signatures that might indicate a person on the ground. Despite excellent flying conditions, the aerial search revealed nothing unusual in the target zone. Weather conditions on May 14th presented both advantages and challenges for searchers. The day was clear and mild, with temperatures reaching the mid-60s, favorable conditions for a ground search. However, the previous night had seen temperatures drop into the mid-40s. If Brandon had been outdoors and immobile during those hours, hypothermia would have been a serious concern. The terrain itself posed significant search challenges. Southwestern Minnesota's landscape features vast agricultural fields interspersed with drainage ditches, small creeks, and occasional wooded areas along waterways. In mid-May, newly planted crops were just beginning to emerge, while other fields lay recently tilled. The Yellow Medicine River, running west to east through the search area, was flowing higher than normal due to spring rains. The search coordinator described the complications. We were dealing with literally thousands of acres of open land. In some ways, this is more challenging than a forest search, because the landscape seems so open. Yet there are countless places where someone could be hidden from view. Drainage ditches, culverts, small depressions in the land. A person could be 50 feet from a searcher and completely invisible if they're lying in a ditch. As the afternoon progressed, the search methodology evolved. Teams conducted grid searches of the immediate area around the vehicle, expanding outward in concentric circles. Other teams focused specifically on the Yellow Medicine River and its banks, given Brandon's description of crossing water during his phone call. K-9 units were brought in from Minneapolis, arriving by late afternoon. These specially trained dogs attempted to pick up Brandon's scent from items provided by his parents. Though the dog showed interest in several directions, no definitive trail was established, a common challenge when a significant time has elapsed between disappearance and search commencement. Throughout this initial day, the Swanson family experienced the particular agony of parents whose child is missing. They remained at the command post, providing information, answering the same questions repeatedly for different officers, and waiting desperately for news. Annette Swanson later described these hours. It's a pain like nothing else, watching all these people searching for your child. You're grateful beyond words for their help, but each passing hour without news is torture. You can't eat, can't think clearly. You just exist in this terrible state of suspension between hope and fear. Brian Swanson added, I kept replaying that phone call in my mind, trying to extract some clue I might have missed. Should I have told him to stay with his car? Could I have somehow pinpointed his location better? The what-ifs are endless and merciless. The Swansons were not passive participants in the search. Brian joined several ground teams throughout the day, retracing the routes he had driven the night before while searching for his son. Both parents provided detailed information about Brandon's habits, health, and the contents of the phone call, any detail that might help guide searchers. By early evening on May 14th, approximately 100 people were actively involved in the search operation. As darkness approached, difficult decisions had to be made about continuing overnight. While some operations can effectively utilize darkness, the vast open terrain and potential water hazards made nighttime searching both dangerous for rescuers and potentially less effective. The sheriff explained the decision. We maintained a scaled-back operation overnight with spotlights and thermal imaging along the river and main roadways, but the full-scale ground search was temporarily suspended until first light. This is standard protocol. We need to ensure the safety of our search personnel while maximizing our effectiveness. As the first day of searching concluded without any sign of Brandon, investigators began developing various theories about what might have happened. These initial hypotheses included accidental drowning in the Yellow Medicine River, possibly explaining the sudden "oh shit" and call termination, disorientation leading to extended wandering and exposure to elements, injury from a fall or other accident, rendering him unable to call for help, encounter with wildlife that might have startled him, possible third-party involvement, though no evidence supported this initially. Detectives summarized the investigative approach. In cases like this, we follow every possible thread simultaneously. We don't focus exclusively on the most likely scenario because we can't be certain what's most likely. We have to consider every possibility, from the mundane to the unlikely. Meanwhile, news of Brandon's disappearance spread rapidly through the tight-knit communities of southwestern Minnesota. The response was immediate and overwhelming. By nightfall on May 14th, local restaurants were delivering food to the command post. Neighbors of the Swansons were caring for their home. Churches organized prayer vigils. In Marshall, Brandon's hometown, his former high school teachers and classmates began organizing additional volunteer searchers for the next day. Local businesses printed flyers with Brandon's photograph and description, which volunteers posted throughout the region. The community coordinator described the mobilization. "This is what rural communities do. We come together when one of our own is in trouble. Everyone knew the Swansons, or knew someone who knew them. Brandon was one of our kids, and we were going to find him." Local media arrived at the scene by late afternoon, and by the evening news broadcasts, Brandon's story was being shared across Minnesota. The unusual circumstances, particularly the 47-minute phone call and mysterious final words, captured public attention immediately. As the first day of the search concluded, Brandon had been missing for approximately 18 hours. His car had been found, but not a single additional trace of him had been discovered. No footprints, no personal items, nothing to indicate his direction of travel after leaving the vehicle. The command post remained active throughout the night, with officers following up on the first wave of tips that began coming in after the media coverage. Most of these initial tips would prove unhelpful. Reported sightings that didn't match the timeline, general theories without specific information, and well-meaning but vague suggestions. At the Swanson home in Marshall, family friends maintained a presence, answering the home phone which was kept open in case Brandon should call. His bedroom remained exactly as he had left it the previous morning. Textbooks on the desk, a half-empty bottle of water on the nightstand, clothes laid out for the next day. As the first night of organized searching gave way to dawn on May 15th, no one involved could have anticipated that days would turn to weeks, weeks to months, and months to years. All without answering the fundamental question: what happened to Brandon Swanson after his phone went silent? The first 24 hours had passed without a single clue beyond the abandoned car, an ominous sign in a missing persons case, where typically the earliest hours are the most likely to yield results. For the Swansons and the entire search operation, this was just the beginning of a long, painful journey into uncertainty. As the sun rose on May 15, 2008, marking the beginning of the second full day of searching for Brandon Swanson, the operation expanded dramatically. What had begun as a localized effort around an abandoned vehicle was now transforming into one of the largest search operations in southwestern Minnesota's history. By 6 a.m., search coordinators had assembled a growing group of volunteers and professionals, outlining the expanded strategy for the day. The search radius would now extend to 5 miles from where Brandon's vehicle was found, encompassing approximately 50,000 acres of terrain, primarily agricultural land interspersed with drainage systems and natural waterways. Priority zones remained the path between the vehicle and the Yellow Medicine River, as well as the river itself. By mid-morning on May 15th, more than 200 searchers were actively involved in the operation. The search area had been divided into grids with teams assigned to specific sectors. Each team carried radios, GPS units, and followed standardized protocols for marking searched areas and documenting potential evidence. Minnesota Department of Natural Resources conservation officers joined the effort, bringing specialized knowledge of the local landscape and waterways. Their expertise proved valuable in identifying areas where a disoriented person might seek shelter, or where natural hazards might pose particular dangers. The Yellow Medicine River became a central focus of the search. Based on Brandon's phone conversation with his father, investigators believed he had crossed the river at some point during his walk. The river was running about 2 feet higher than normal due to spring rainfall, creating strong currents in certain sections. In this area, the riverbanks can be steep and unstable, with drops of 6 to 10 feet in places. Specialized water search teams deployed along an 8-mile stretch of the Yellow Medicine River. Using inflatable boats, they methodically examined both banks and the water itself. Underwater cameras were employed in deeper sections and areas with reduced visibility. While water teams focused on the river, ground teams combed the surrounding farmland. The terrain presented unique challenges. In mid-May, some fields were freshly planted, while others remained untilled. Visibility across open areas was excellent, but the landscape's subtle contours created countless blind spots, where a person could be completely hidden from view. Search teams used a grid pattern with searchers spaced approximately 10 feet apart, moving in straight lines across fields. Each person was responsible for thoroughly examining their corridor, paying particular attention to ditches, culverts, abandoned farm equipment, anywhere a person might seek shelter or fall and become hidden from view. As the search expanded, so did the array of specialized K9 units. In addition to traditional tracking dogs, cadaver dogs specially trained to detect human remains were brought in from Minneapolis and St. Paul. Though the introduction of these dogs marked a somber shift in the operation's tone, search coordinators emphasized that this was standard protocol, not an indication they believed Brandon was deceased. Ground-penetrating radar was employed in areas of interest, capable of detecting anomalies beneath the soil surface. Sonar equipment was used extensively along the deeper sections of the Yellow Medicine River. Law enforcement officials emphasized that no technology was spared in the effort to find Brandon. If a tool existed that might help locate him, they deployed it. Cost was never a consideration. This was about bringing a young man home to his family. By the end of the first week, the search had covered approximately 75% of the primary target zone, a remarkable achievement given the vast territory involved. Yet despite the intensity of the effort and the technology employed, not a single conclusive piece of evidence had been found. No clothing, no wallet, no keys, no sign of Brandon Swanson. As the operation continued into its second week, the weather began to complicate efforts. Late May brought thunderstorms to southwestern Minnesota, temporarily halting aerial searches and making ground operations more difficult and dangerous. The Yellow Medicine River rose another foot, further challenging the water search teams and potentially obscuring evidence along the banks. Search coordinators adjusted their methodologies daily based on conditions, researching key areas after significant weather events. The understanding was that rain could wash away evidence, but it could also reveal items by moving soil or vegetation. The changing landscape itself presented additional challenges. As May progressed into June, vegetation grew rapidly across the search area. Fields that had been clearly visible in mid-May were now obscured by growing crops. Grasses along the river banks and in uncultivated areas grew taller, potentially concealing evidence that might have been visible earlier. Agricultural activities also impacted the search. Farmers necessarily continued their seasonal work, altering parts of the landscape through planting, tilling, and other normal farming operations. Search teams worked closely with local farmers to document which areas had been modified and how these changes might affect search efforts. Throughout this period, community support remained unwavering. Local residents opened their homes to out-of-town searchers. Restaurants provided meals around the clock. Churches established rotation schedules to ensure that someone was always praying for Brandon and for those searching for him. The volunteer participation was extraordinary. People took time off work, driving from across Minnesota and neighboring states to join the search. Many had no connection to the Swanson family, but were moved by the mysterious circumstances of Brandon's disappearance. At the peak of the operation, nearly 500 people were involved in the search for Brandon Swanson. Managing this many volunteers required careful organization, ensuring everyone was properly briefed, assigned appropriate tasks, and accounted for at the end of each day. As weeks passed, the psychological toll on everyone involved became increasingly evident. For search professionals, the lack of results despite enormous effort created frustration and a sense of failure, though they remained outwardly optimistic and determined. For the Swanson family, the emotional journey was excruciating. Hope and despair alternated in cruel cycles. Each day without news was both a disappointment and, paradoxically, a reason to continue hoping. No news meant no confirmation of their worst fears. In public statements, Brandon's parents described the painful limbo they found themselves in. The not knowing created a unique form of torture, where their minds created every possible scenario, from the hopeful to the unbearable. They found themselves bargaining with the universe, just wanting to know what happened to their son, even if it was the worst news imaginable, just to end the uncertainty. A month had now passed, and difficult decisions had to be made about the scale and nature of the search operation. While the active, daily search involving hundreds of people could not be sustained indefinitely, authorities were clear that the case remained open and a priority. Law enforcement announced the transition. After 30 days of intensive searching covering more than 100,000 acres by foot, air, and water, they would adjust their approach. Daily large-scale operations would be scaled back, but targeted searches would continue based on new information or leads. The investigation remained active and would continue until Brandon was found. This transition marked the beginning of a new phase in the search for Brandon Swanson. Large groups of volunteers were replaced by specialized teams focusing on specific areas of interest. New technologies were deployed as they became available. Seasonal changes to the landscape prompted periodic re-examination of previously searched territories. In July 2008, dogs indicated interest in an area approximately 1.5 miles northwest of where Brandon's car was found. This area, featuring thick brush and a small seasonal pond, had been searched previously, but was revisited with greater intensity. The search team brought in specialized equipment to drain portions of the pond and conducted an inch-by-inch examination of the surrounding area. The dogs were clearly alerting on something, but despite exhaustive efforts, searchers couldn't identify what had triggered their interest. By late summer, the physical search had covered virtually every accessible acre within a 7-mile radius of Brandon's abandoned vehicle. The Yellow Medicine River had been examined repeatedly along a 12-mile stretch. Abandoned buildings, wells, drainage systems, and other potential hazards had been methodically checked and documented. Experienced search and rescue personnel involved in the case noted that they had never seen an operation this extensive for a single missing person. The combination of professional resources, volunteer commitment, and technological assets was extraordinary. That they found no definitive evidence despite this effort made the case uniquely perplexing. As fall approached, bringing cooler temperatures and the harvest season, search methodologies adapted once again. The clearing of crop fields provided new opportunities to examine areas that had been obscured by vegetation during the summer months. Hunters entering wooded areas and river valleys were briefed on what to look for and how to report potential evidence. Mental health professionals continued working with the Swanson family as they navigated this new reality. This meant helping the family understand that continuing to live their lives, returning to work, maintaining routines, was not abandoning Brandon, but was necessary for their survival during this extended ordeal. The search for Brandon Swanson became not just an operation, but an ongoing part of life in southwestern Minnesota. Yellow ribbons appeared on trees and mailboxes throughout the region, silent reminders of the young man still missing. His story was told and retold, keeping public awareness alive and generating occasional new tips and leads. After 6 months, search coordinators faced a sobering reality. This case was redefining what they understood about missing persons. With modern technology, cell phone data, and the extensive resources deployed, it seemed impossible that a person could simply vanish without a trace. Yet that's exactly what had happened. Brandon Swanson had walked into the Minnesota night and somehow disappeared completely. In the midst of their unimaginable grief and ongoing search for answers, the Swanson family channeled their pain into purpose. Brian and Annette Swanson began to recognize a critical gap in Minnesota's response to missing persons cases, one that had directly affected the search for their son. When Brandon first went missing in May 2008, his parents encountered a systemic obstacle that shocked them. Because Brandon was 19 years old, legally an adult, some law enforcement agencies initially hesitated to immediately launch a full-scale search operation. Though local authorities in Yellow Medicine County had responded promptly, the Swansons learned that many other families of missing adults faced significant delays in getting official search efforts underway. This revelation came as Brandon's parents spoke with other families of missing persons throughout Minnesota. They discovered a troubling pattern. Law enforcement agencies sometimes waited 24, 48, or even 72 hours before fully mobilizing resources to search for missing adults, operating under an outdated assumption that adults who disappear likely do so voluntarily. We learned that critical time was often lost in these cases, Brian Swanson explained in public testimony. The first 24 hours are crucial in any missing person case. Every hour that passes makes the search more difficult and reduces the chances of finding the person alive. For the Swansons, This realization sparked a mission that would eventually change Minnesota law. In late 2008, while still actively searching for their son, they began working with state legislators to draft a bill that would eliminate waiting periods for missing persons cases, regardless of age. State Representative Marty Seifert and State Senator Dennis Frederickson became key allies in this effort, helping to craft legislation that would eventually become known as Brandon's Law. The bill aimed to require law enforcement agencies to take immediate action when any person is reported missing under dangerous circumstances, regardless of age. The Swansons traveled repeatedly to the Minnesota State Capitol in St. Paul, meeting with lawmakers and sharing Brandon's story. In testimony before legislative committees, they described the agonizing uncertainty they continued to face and explained how immediate search response might help other families avoid similar pain. No family should have to wait while precious hours slip away. Annette Swanson testified before a House committee. When someone disappears under unusual circumstances, every minute counts. Brandon's case shows that even young, healthy adults can find themselves in life-threatening situations that require immediate response. The proposed legislation contains several key provisions. 1. Law enforcement agencies would be required to accept missing persons reports without delay. 2. Police would be mandated to immediately conduct a preliminary investigation when someone is reported missing under dangerous circumstances. 3. The 24-hour waiting period for entering adult missing persons into the national database would be eliminated. 4. Information about missing adults would be shared with other jurisdictions promptly, rather than after an arbitrary waiting period. As the bill moved through legislative committees in early 2009, the Swansons continued their dual mission, searching for Brandon while advocating for changes that would help other families. They attended every hearing, sometimes driving to the Capitol directly from search sites in southwestern Minnesota. Law enforcement representatives, including sheriffs and police chiefs from across the state, largely supported the proposed changes. Many testified that they already followed these practices as a matter of policy, but acknowledged the importance of codifying them into law to ensure consistent response statewide. On May 7, 2009, almost exactly 1 year after Brandon's disappearance, the Minnesota House of Representatives passed the bill unanimously. The Senate followed with its own unanimous approval 5 days later. On May 21, 2009, Governor Tim Pawlenty signed Brandon's Law in a ceremony attended by the Swanson family. The law, officially titled Minnesota Missing Persons Act, but commonly known as Brandon's Law, took effect July 1, 2009. It represented a significant shift in how missing adults cases would be handled in Minnesota, eliminating arbitrary waiting periods and ensuring prompt response for all missing persons regardless of age. The passage of Brandon's Law transformed Minnesota's approach to missing persons cases. Before the law, police departments often waited 24 hours or longer before initiating searches for missing adults. Within the first year of implementation, the impact was already apparent. Minnesota law enforcement agencies reported faster response times for missing persons cases and improved coordination between jurisdictions. The elimination of waiting periods meant that critical early hours were no longer lost while families waited for official action. For the Swanson family, the law represented both a personal victory and a profound legacy for their son. While the search for Brandon continued without resolution, his disappearance had led to systemic changes that would help other families in similar circumstances. "We couldn't bring Brandon home," Brian Swanson said at a commemoration of the law's passage, "but we could make sure other families had a better chance at finding their loved ones. That's what Brandon would have wanted." The impact of Brandon's Law extended beyond Minnesota. Advocates for missing persons in other states began citing Minnesota's approach as a model for legislative reform. Several states, including Wisconsin and Iowa, considered similar measures in the years following the passage of Brandon's Law. Missing persons organizations nationwide praised the legislation as an example of best practices in missing persons response. The elimination of arbitrary waiting periods was recognized as particularly significant, acknowledging the reality that adults can find themselves in dangerous situations, requiring immediate action just as children can. Law enforcement training in Minnesota evolved to incorporate the requirements of Brandon's Law. Officers received specific guidance on assessing dangerous circumstances, that would trigger immediate investigation, including missing under mental or physical health concerns, missing in severe weather conditions, disappearance inconsistent with established patterns, suspicion that disappearance may be involuntary, belief person may be in danger based on circumstances. This training helps standardize response across different agencies and jurisdictions, ensuring consistent application of the law throughout the state. For the Swansons, advocacy for Brandon's law became a channel for their grief, a way to create meaning from their ongoing tragedy. While continuing to search for Brandon and cope with his absence, they found purpose in knowing that other families would benefit from faster, more effective responses to missing persons reports. "Nothing will ever fill the hole in our hearts," Annette Swanson told reporters at the one-year anniversary of the law's implementation. "But knowing that Brandon's disappearance has led to changes that may save other lives gives us some comfort in our darkest moments." The implementation of Brandon's law represented a significant shift in how missing persons cases are understood. Rather than assuming adults who disappear do so voluntarily, the law recognized that adults can face dangers requiring immediate response, whether from accidents, medical emergencies, criminal activity, or environmental hazards. Law enforcement officials who worked on Brandon's case have cited the law as one of its most important outcomes. While the mystery of what happened to Brandon Swanson remains unsolved, his case fundamentally changed how Minnesota, and increasingly other states, respond to reports of missing adults. Brandon's law stands as a testament to how a family's advocacy can transform tragedy into meaningful change. From the mysterious disappearance of a 19-year-old college student emerged legislation that has potentially saved lives and certainly provided other families with faster, more effective responses in their moments of crisis. As one state senator remarked during debate on the bill, "This law won't bring Brandon home to his family, but it ensures that his disappearance will have lasting meaning for our state and for countless families who will never know how much they owe to a young man they never met." Brandon Swanson's legacy now extends far beyond his too brief life, embodied in a law that bears his name and changes the fate of other missing persons throughout Minnesota and beyond. Through Brandon's law, a young man who vanished without a trace continues to make his presence felt in the improved chances that others might be found. More than 17 years have passed since Brandon Swanson vanished into the night of rural Minnesota. The fields have been planted and harvested 17 times. The Yellow Medicine River has frozen and thawed through 17 winters and springs. Technologies have advanced, investigators have come and gone, but the fundamental questions remain unanswered. What happened to Brandon Swanson after his phone went silent? This question haunts not only his family, but everyone who has been involved in the search over the years. It represents one of the most perplexing modern disappearances, a case with substantial initial information that somehow led nowhere. We know Brandon left a gathering in Canby, Minnesota on May 13, 2008, after celebrating the end of his first year at Minnesota West Community and Technical College. We know his car was found abandoned near Porter, Minnesota, approximately 25 miles from where he believed himself to be. We know he spoke to his father for 47 minutes, describing his surroundings and his attempt to walk toward what he thought were the lights of Lind. We know what his final words were before the call abruptly ended at approximately 2:41 a.m. on May 14, 2008. And then, nothing. Despite one of the most extensive searches in Minnesota history, covering thousands of acres with hundreds of personnel utilizing increasingly sophisticated technology, not a single additional trace of Brandon Swanson has ever been found. No clothing, no wallet, no keys, no physical remains. Nothing to indicate what transpired in those moments after his final words. For Brandon's parents, Brian and Annette Swanson, the years have brought a painful evolution in their relationship with uncertainty. In recent interviews, they have spoken with remarkable candor about living in the space between hope and acceptance. "You never stop being the parent of a missing child," Annette Swanson reflected in a recent statement. "Time doesn't change that fundamental reality. What changes is how you carry it, how you learn to incorporate this unanswered question into your continuing life." Brian Swanson added, "In the early years, we lived in a state of constant anticipation, always expecting the phone to ring with news, always waiting for that one breakthrough. Eventually, you realize that you can't sustain that level of suspended animation. You have to find a way to move forward while still honoring your commitment to finding answers. The Swansons have demonstrated remarkable resilience in transforming their personal tragedy into positive action. Beyond their successful advocacy for Brandon's law, they remain active in missing persons networks, supporting other families navigating similar uncertainty and advocating for continued improvements in how these cases are handled. Brandon's story didn't end on May 14, 2008, Annette stated during a recent anniversary event. It continues through Brandon's law, through the improvements in how missing persons cases are handled, through the support we try to provide to other families. We couldn't bring Brandon home, but we could ensure his life continues to have meaning and impact. Law enforcement officials confirm that Brandon's case remains open and will never be closed until answers are found. While active, large-scale searches now occur less frequently. The investigation continues in other forms: periodic reviews of the evidence, application of new technologies as they become available, and follow-up on any new information that emerges. This case changed how we think about missing persons investigations, stated a Yellow Medicine County Sheriff's Office spokesperson. It demonstrated both the extraordinary capabilities of modern search techniques and their limitations. We learned that despite our best efforts, some questions remain unanswered, but that doesn't mean we stop trying to answer them. The possibility of resolution remains, even after all these years. Cold cases are solved with surprising frequency, often through unexpected developments. New witnesses sometimes come forward years or even decades after an incident, finally sharing information they previously withheld. For anyone with information about Brandon Swanson's disappearance, the message from both law enforcement and his family remains consistent. It is never too late to come forward. Even details that might seem insignificant could provide the connection that finally resolves this enduring mystery. If you know something, if you saw something, if you heard something, please come forward, Brian Swanson urged in a recent public appeal. We're not looking for someone to blame. We just want to know what happened to our son. The Yellow Medicine River continues its patient journey through the Minnesota countryside, carrying whatever secrets it may hold about that night in May 2008. The fields around Porter and Lind continue their seasonal cycles, the landscape gradually changing as years pass. The rural roads Brandon traveled that night remain much as they were, stretching through the darkness between small towns. For those who have followed Brandon's case over the years, investigators, volunteers, community members, and countless others touched by his story, the mystery carries a profound message about the fragility of human certainty. Despite all our technology, despite our confidence in our ability to find answers, some questions remain beyond our reach. Brandon's case reminds us of our limitations, reflected one longtime investigator who has worked the case since the beginning. In an age when we can track phones within meters, when cameras are everywhere, when it seems like privacy has vanished, somehow, a 19-year-old college student can still vanish without a trace. It's a humbling reminder of how vast our world remains, despite our attempts to map and monitor every corner of it. For Brandon's friends, now in their 30s with careers and families, his absence remains a constant reminder of life's unpredictability. Former classmates describe the strange sensation of moving forward through life's milestones, while Brandon remains forever 19, forever on that dark road between Porter and Lind. When we get together, there's always a moment when someone mentions Brandon, said one former classmate. It's like time freezes briefly. We all wonder what he would be doing now, who he would have become. And then there's that unanswerable question: what happened that night? Thank you for joining us for this in-depth exploration of the Brandon Swanson case, one of Minnesota's most baffling unsolved disappearances. At Murder and Mystery HQ, we believe these stories deserve to be told with care, respect, and attention to detail. Our goal is not sensationalism, but understanding, bringing thoughtful analysis to cases that continue to challenge investigators and haunt families. Brandon's story is more than just a mystery. It's a testament to a family's enduring love, a community's unwavering support, and the profound impact one life can have, even in absence. Through Brandon's law, his legacy continues to protect others and give families the immediate response they deserve when a loved one goes missing. If you found value in this documentary, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Murder and Mystery HQ. Your support allows us to continue researching and presenting these important stories with the depth and respect they deserve. Hit the notification bell to stay updated on our upcoming investigations into other compelling unsolved cases. Each like, comment, and share helps us reach more people who care about these stories and the families still searching for answers. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next investigation.